This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Hello, and welcome back to a very exciting episode of the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Alex Massford. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode and to be continuing to listen to the GSMC Sports Podcast. If you are a returning listener, we really do appreciate you. Before I start talking anything sports, and we have so much to get to today, I want to remind you all of a couple of things. First of all, do not forget to subscribe to the podcast on your phone, on your laptop, on your watch, or on whatever application or website you are listening to this on. We'd really appreciate it if you would please subscribe to the podcast. You want to subscribe to the podcast for a couple of reasons, but the main one being you want to get those alerts and notifications, again, on your phone, laptop, or watch, or whatever you're listening to this on. You want to get those alerts and those notifications so you know when we drop a new episode of the GSMC Sports Podcast, when we do actually drop one here at the GSMC Sports Podcast team. Again, please subscribe to the podcast on whatever app or website you're listening to this on. Again, you want to subscribe to the podcast so you get those alerts and notifications, and you know when we drop a new episode of the GSMC Sports Podcast when we do, and you can be one of the first people to listen to a new episode when we release it. Again, please subscribe to the podcast. Also, please leave us a 5-star review or just a positive review in general as well. Whatever app or website you're listening to this on, again, please leave us a 5-star review or just a positive review. If you're enjoying the content and discussion points, it would give us a big boost of confidence knowing that you guys are enjoying the topics, discussion points, just really in general how the show's being run, everything in general. It would just give us a big boost of confidence if you would leave us a 5-star review or just a positive review in general. And finally, don't forget to follow us on all social media platforms as well. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram is where you can primarily follow us. On social media, we'd love to interact with you guys more on there. Again, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. On social media, we can talk about pretty much anything you guys want. We can talk about the show, some breaking news in sports like we're going to do today. Whatever games on, the Sunday night game, Monday night game, we can talk about it on there as well. Just overall, we'd love to interact with you guys more on social media. So again, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram is where you can primarily follow us, and we would love if you would give us a follow on all 3 of those social media platforms. We have a fantastic show for you all today. Towards the end of the episode, I'm going to be talking a little bit of NFL. I want to get through everything. What is it? Week 9 of the NFL season, I think it is. I think it's week 9, right? Or no, week 9. Yeah, week 9. Everyone is through week 9, heading into week 10. I want to kind of give you all my main storylines. I think some teams have played 9 games, some teams have played 10 games, so I might actually be heading into week 11. Either way, it's week 10 or week 11 of the NFL season going into it. I'm not going to talk about any games this week. I want to talk about recapping all the games instead of talking about the games in the future. That's going to come in at the end of the episode. I want to talk about, everything. The big New England Patriot win over the Baltimore Ravens we'll get to. We'll talk about the New Orleans Saints, Drew Brees injury. Can Jameis Winston hold down that division? We'll talk about the AFC East race between the Dolphins and the Bills. We have a lot of NFL to talk about, but that's coming on later on in the episode. Again, before I start with talking these stories, I also want to remind you guys, no matter where you are and however you may be listening, I hope you and your family are very happy and healthy during these times in the world today. Again, towards the end of the episode, we're going to be giving you those NFL storylines and headlines, everything I want to talk about NFL coming on at the end of the episode. But I want to start off with some NBA breaking news / news over the past couple 24 hours, 48 hours. So I told you in my last episode, which was on Sunday, that Monday at noon is when those trading sort of restrictions on NBA players are lifted. And it's not officially the new league year start, but you can pretty much call it that day, Monday, which is when it was yesterday when you're listening to this, as the first day where trades and sort of transactions can be made in the NBA. Again, past the trading deadline, no trades can be made, but now it is lifted and it's officially happening. And boy, were there a ton of trades to be made. We have two really, really big official trades. We have the Jrue Holiday trade and the Bogdan Bogdanovic trade, if you want to consider that major, both to the Milwaukee Bucks. I'll probably talk about that later on the show as well. And of course, the Chris Paul to the Phoenix Suns trade. I will get into all of those trades and all of the other rumors surrounding Victor Oladipo, Russell Westbrook, the Miami Heat, the New York Knicks, all of that good stuff, not to mention the NBA draft is tomorrow when you listen to this. But we're going to start off with the biggest rumor of the day, and that is Adrian Wojnarowski's report that James Harden is done in Houston. Apparently, he declined a 2-year, $103 million extension, or just a little over $50 million a year, which would have made him the highest paid player in the NBA, would have became the first $50 million a year player in the NBA. And he said no to all that because he would like to leave Houston. Now, I'm not entirely surprised. I am entirely surprised on how this way with Houston went. I really thought they were just going to run it back with a same roster. But after Russell Westbrook wanted out of Houston, I think the writing on the wall was pretty obvious that James Harden was going to want out as well. Houston doesn't have any picks, doesn't have a clear-cut way to really improve the roster, not a lot of trade assets. And when Russ wanted out and knowing that they're probably not going to get a huge amount of compensation for Russell Westbrook, whether he's traded to the Knicks or the Charlotte Hornets, which seem to be the only two teams that are really interested in a guy like Russell Westbrook. Again, so the writing was kind of on the wall that maybe James Harden would also want out of Houston. And some of the teams that I speculated could be interested in him were Brooklyn, Philadelphia, and Miami. Now, it turns out that Miami and Philadelphia are interested, but it appears that the, interest isn't necessarily mutual between James Harden and those teams. I don't think James Harden necessarily wants to go play for the Miami Heat. I don't think he necessarily wants to go play for Philadelphia either. Not that he has a huge say in the matter. Houston can obviously trade him to whoever they want. I do not believe he has a no-trade clause. But according to Adrian Wojnarowski, the message was clear. Get me to Brooklyn. Now, I want to talk about everything Brooklyn Nets for the rest of this segment potentially, and everything this James Harden, Russell Westbrook sort of fallout and everything as well. There has been no official trade of James Harden just yet to Brooklyn. However, Adrian Wojnarowski, who's probably the most most respected and probably most consistent reporter, besides maybe Shams, they're pretty much, LeBron and Jordan of NBA reporters, saying that he wants out and only wants to go to Brooklyn. It's pretty much confirmed. Now, in years past, I would say with a specific type of trade that maybe the player might not get what he wishes here. Again, if you remember when Paul George initially demanded a trade from Indiana, he wanted to go to LA, the Clippers or the Lakers. Now, he eventually got what he wanted and ended up on the Clippers, but there was a stop in Oklahoma City before then. I think when Carmelo demanded a trade from New York, he didn't necessarily want to go to AKC. He went there as well. So not every single time a superstar player demands a trade like this, does the player get their way? But we saw with Anthony Davis, he got his way, and we've seen with many other players getting their way as well. I expect James Harden to get his way. Now, there's been reports that Houston would only be interested in a James Harden trade if it meant getting one of KD or Kyrie. They're not going to get either of those. And according to Kevin O'Connor of The Ringer, the Brooklyn Nets are pretty much throwing, the direct quote is, the everything, including the kitchen sink, to get something along the lines of, Karis LeVert, potentially Jared Allen as well, if you want to throw him in there as well, Spencer Dinwiddie, and picks and pick swaps, right? You'll hear the 3 first-round picks and the 2 pick swaps and everything under the sun, including, things like that, right? Which is interesting, and I understand where they're coming from. And I think that's the only way that the Nets really want to get this deal done. There's also been some reports that Harden wants to come to Brooklyn, and KD wants Harden to come to Brooklyn as well, but Kyrie's more on the fence of it. At the end of the day, I think those 3 guys want to make something work, and if the reports are true that Kyrie isn't necessarily all in on it, I think KD can convince him to be. And if this is truly the only destination that James Harden wants to get to, I think there is a way that James Harden does eventually end up on Brooklyn, and I think it's the route that I just mentioned. Spencer Dinwiddie, Karis LeVert, and picks, and maybe also Jared Allen as well, but I'm not as sure that he'd be included in a trade, please. But definitely Karis LeVert, definitely Spencer Dinwiddie, definitely 3 first-round picks minimum, and probably 2 pick swaps. That is something along the lines of the Jrue Holiday we just saved from Milwaukee, which I think was an overpay, but I'll get to that later. And we saw with the Anthony Davis trade from the New Orleans Pelicans to the LA Lakers. Those are along the lines of a trade we're looking at here. I think it eventually gets done. A couple of reporters who aren't necessarily as reliable as Shams or Woj have said that it's virtually a done deal. There is a reporter coming out. I don't know his name. I apologize. I just saw it on Twitter recently. I think he reports for Nets Daily and maybe also a newspaper, where he has said that it's pretty much a verbal agreement between a verbal agreement between the Rockets and the Nets that eventually something is going to get done here. So I am under the impression right now that eventually James Harden is going to be a member of the Brooklyn Nets and join forces with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving with head coach Steve Nash and pretty much form a super team again. I do not think currently in the NBA, pre-Harden trade, there is a super team in this league. I think everybody in the NBA knows this league is wide open. The championship is wide open. We saw a team in the Miami Heat who is also looking to make moves, get to the NBA Finals as a 5 seed in the Eastern Conference. We saw the Lakers make it to the Finals, but also there's plenty of challenging opponents in the Western Conference. The league is wide open because we are currently in an era of duos. We saw that all year last year where the theme was duos. While the duo of Kyrie and Kevin Durant hasn't gotten to show that duo off yet, they might become a trio before a duo. If Harden is, in fact, on his way to Brooklyn and eventually makes his way to become a Brooklyn Net and join forces between KD and Kyrie, they are the only, and I repeat, the only super team in the NBA. That trio is better than LeBron and AD. It is better than Butler and Bam. It is better than, Kemba and Tatum. It's better than, who else you want to say, Kawhi and Paul George, right? And they become instantly, in my opinion, championship favorites, and almost to an extent, the level of championship favorites Golden State was. I wouldn't say I put them at the same level as Golden State, because I think a Harden, Kevin Durant, and Kyrie trio is, I don't know if it's as good as Steph, Clay, and KD. Now, I think on paper it's just as good, but I think on the court, the game fit that KD, Steph, and Clay had as shooters and things like that, I don't think that can be matched with Harden, Kyrie, and KD. I think they all just play a little bit of a different way. But Kyrie does have already experience deferring to a guy in LeBron James. Kevin Durant obviously played on the previous super team in Golden State, so both of those guys know how to play Robin to a Batman or to pass the ball around or play without the ball. The only concern here is James Harden, who has never really been a part of a super team. He's always been the best player on the team. He's always been the number one option, specifically ever since he got to Houston. That would change if he came to Brooklyn. I would put James Harden as the number 2 option in Brooklyn. I would have Kevin Durant as number 1. But if these guys can somehow figure out a way to make their games work together, this team is the best team in the NBA. I'm not sure it's close either. I think the only teams that could really push for, beating Brooklyn in a championship at that point would be obviously the Los Angeles Lakers after adding Dennis Schroeder, maintaining LeBron James and Anthony Davis. They would be the number 1 contender to Brooklyn as clear championship favorites. The Miami Heat, if they made a couple of moves, added a Victor Oladipo, Danilo Gallinari, Bradley Beal potentially, I could see them sliding up and being contenders after already making the finals last year. Boston, if they can make some more moves. Milwaukee just added Bogdan Bogdanovic and Jrue Holiday. I'd put them in that category too. So the NBA would go from a duos league to a bunch of people trying to beat the Brooklyn Nets, which is very, very interesting considering, again, Brooklyn wasn't the defending NBA champions. That is the LA Lakers. Now, the argument would be, is this the greatest, 3-man trio we've ever seen assembled? On paper, you can argue that. The greatest big 3 I have ever seen in my lifetime, and I think in NBA history, was the Miami Heat. Now, Golden State, I think, was the better team than those 2012, 2013 Miami Heat teams, but I think the trio, just specifically, if it was a 3-on-3 basketball league, I think the Miami Heat have currently the best 3-man trio ever. I love KD, Steph, and Clay, and I think they obviously had more success than the Miami Heat did, but Dwayne Wade, LeBron James, and Chris Bosh, there was just something about it that I think made it better. The difference between those Miami Heat championships and, of course, the Golden State Warriors dynasty, as I think the Warriors did a little bit of a better roster construction maybe around some of those teams, better role players, better leaders, guys like Andre Iguodala, not to discredit anything that like Shane Battier, Mike Miller, Birdman did, Mario Chalmers for the Miami Heat. I just think that maybe the Warriors had a better roster construction. On top of that, I think the competition was a little bit less. Those Spurs teams were really good. Those Dallas Maverick teams were really good. Not taking away anything from those LeBron James teams, but once Kyrie kind of left and KD obviously went to Golden State, the mismatch only sort of accelerated from there. But getting back to Brooklyn, the argument and the question on everybody's mind is now, is if James Harden is in fact traded to the Brooklyn Nets, is that the greatest trio, in NBA history? Is that a super team? The answer to is that a super team is yes. They're the clear-cut favorites. They would absolutely be the best. And when it comes to a trio, I don't think there has ever been or will ever be, if this deal does in fact happen again. When I'm at the time of this recording, James Harden has not officially been traded to the Brooklyn Nets, but multiple reports are saying that it's a verbal agreement at this point. Again, not Chandler Woods, but guys who report for the Nets are saying it's a verbal agreement. So I'm operating under the assumption that happens. I think that is the greatest big 3 trio from an offensive standpoint, and it's not close. I think that has more offensive firepower than Steph, Clay, and KD did, and that was arguably maybe the greatest offensive dynasty ever. I think that has more offensive firepower than, what the Miami Heat had. but will they be a potential dynasty and reach the level of the Miami Heat and Golden State has everything to do with one person and one person only. And I don't think we're talking about this man enough, because of course we know how great KD and Kyrie are already going to be, and if they had Harden, that would be incredible as well, right? So everyone's thinking that the X factor of all this is James Harden. The X factor is not James Harden, because if James Harden does get to Brooklyn, more work needs to be done than if he doesn't go to Brooklyn. I think the X factor to all of this is new head coach Steve Nash. Now, we heard all that BS and, KD and Kyrie saying, we don't really need a coach. We're going to coach ourselves. Steve Nash is just another basketball IQ guy, mind in the room. Steve Nash is the head coach of the Brooklyn Nets. And if he does, in fact, land James Harden, he needs to be more of a coach than ever, because I think a system, an offensive system, would need to be developed to somehow get the ball to all three of those guys, while also having all three of those guys get their points, get their touches, and still be efficient at the same time. You don't want somebody dominating the ball more than anybody else. You obviously want one clear-cut guy that you're going to give the ball to in the fourth quarter. I think they have that in Kevin Durant. But can Steve Nash, the brilliant basketball, mind Steve Nash has never been head coach in high school, didn't be head coach in college. He's going straight to the NBA here. So not a lot of experience from that, but here's why he's the X factor. Steve Nash is arguably one of the smartest basketball players of all time, just from a basketball IQ standpoint. I think if anybody can somehow figure out a way to develop an offensive system, it would be him. Not to mention he did spend some time around the Golden State Warriors during Kevin Durant and their dynasty. So he was around that team that had clearly made an offensive system that was super effective while getting the ball to Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, and Klay Thompson, also Draymond Green if you want to throw him in there as well. So I think Steve Nash has all the tools to do that, but that's going to decide if this team fully makes it to Warrior level or Miami Heat level in 2012, 2013, is how can this offensive system be developed through the great mind of Steve Nash? Can he do it? I think so. Will he do it? That is a different question. The other thing that's going to decide is if this Nets team is legit or not, assuming they do land James Harden, which again, he has not been officially traded yet, is the roster construction around them, because you're going to be paying Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and James Harden a ton of money. You're not going to have a lot of money to fill around sort of those gaps. You would have DeAndre Jordan at the 5, I'm assuming. You would still need sort of a small forward / power forward, depending on where you're playing Kevin Durant. But if you did land James Harden, the reason why I have the offensive system and the coaching above roster construction, despite the fact I just went on that huge rant about roster construction between the Heat and the Warriors, is because in today's NBA, there's a ton of guys on the vet minimum that are just looking to win a championship. And if you did add James Harden, they become the clear-cut favorites, and they would get a bunch of guys on the veteran minimum. So I'm not as worried about roster construction as I am about coaching an offensive system. But again, I really do believe Steve Nash will be the X factor to all this. I will obviously go way, way more in depth and do way more research if this trade does officially go through. Again, Harden to Brooklyn. If I had to speculate around a trade package, I know the reports are saying that the Nets only want to trade Harden if they can get one of KD or Kyrie back. Obviously, they're not getting either of those back. That's a non-starter for Brooklyn. This is more of a luxury thing for Brooklyn than anything. And I think Brooklyn is definitely willing to overpay / again, like Kevin O'Connor said, throw everything, including the kitchen sink, to make this work. Because this is generational opportunity. The Miami Heat had a generational opportunity to make Dwayne Wade, LeBron James, and Chris Bosh all on their team. They tore down their roster, traded guys, traded picks, made money to get that to happen. The Golden State Warriors had an incredible opportunity to add Kevin Durant to already a record-setting team. They did it. They moved money. They made things work. When generational opportunities come about, there's not many chances, or not many times, I should say, where things fall through and the deal doesn't eventually get done, which is why I really do believe James Harden is eventually going to be a Brooklyn Net, if that is truly the only place he really wants to go. All right, that's going to do it for this segment. On the other side of this short break here, I want to get into the other two major trades made in the NBA world. The Phoenix Suns have obviously acquired Chris Paul. I want to get into everything like that and why the Phoenix Suns could be better than people give them credit for. On top of all that, I also want to get into the Jrue Holiday, Bogdan Bogdanovic trade that Milwaukee landed. Does that mean 100% Giannis Antetokounmpo is going to sign and stay? I'll give you my theory on why Milwaukee was so aggressive and potentially overpaid for all those moves, as well as some more breaking tweets from Shams. As I was recording that segment, there was a tweet that Shams just tweeted that apparently the Wizards and the Rockets have had discussions primarily between a Russell Westbrook and John Wall swap. So I'll get into all that good stuff. Russell Westbrook's market, as well as those things I just mentioned. It was all the Jrue Holiday trade and the Chris Paul trade. All of that good stuff. I love the NBA. I'm so happy I get to be talking about all these breaking news and all these trades. We'll get into all that good stuff right after this short break.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back here at the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Again, I am your host, Alex Masford. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode and to be continuing to listen to the GSMC Sports Podcast. Again, if you are a returning listener, we really do appreciate you here at the GSMC Sports Podcast team. I just finished talking everything James Harden, Brooklyn Nets. Again, there has been no confirmed trade between the two teams, but according to Nets Daily and a couple of other sources that are closer to the Nets, again, no national reporter, no Shams, Woj have said anything concrete that a trade is being finalized, but Woj did say they've had some conversations about it, and Harden definitely wants to be traded to Brooklyn. And according to Nets Daily, apparently it's a verbal agreement that eventually this thing is going to be worked out. And again, I think on paper, and I think what will actually really be implemented is that this trio might be the greatest offensive trio the NBA has really ever seen. And I think that's a really, really interesting and awesome thing. Again, the NBA offseason is really something that just keeps on giving. Don't get me wrong, I love the National Football League. And once the season started, my show, not my show, I should say, but this, when I have an episode, it's been a lot of NFL talk. And again, I love the NFL, I love football, I love everything about it, and I think the NFL dominates the headlines. But there's nothing like the NBA season. There's nothing like the offseason when the NBA starts. Because again, the NFL offseason is great. There's trades and there's certainly some free agency. But I don't think any sport, baseball, hockey included, and of course the NFL, college football, really captures and perfects the offseason like the NBA. We are out of the bubble and immediately, the championship ends. Everyone talks about the champion for a week and then it's immediately, how are we going to upgrade and when are we going to upgrade? And, that's soon, right? We had trades, yesterday and maybe even today when you're listening to this, some more trades were happening. And of course, tomorrow when you're listening to this is the NBA draft. And then after that, free agency starts. And then December 1st, training camp opens. And then December 22nd, near Christmas time, the season starts back up again. So it's just a constant process of the NBA of playing and then changing and then drafting and then trading and then, signing and then boom, they're back. And I think no sport, no league has really perfected the offseason like the NBA has, and I don't think any team has really dominated Twitter and social media like the NBA has as well. Now, I want to continue talking about the NBA, speaking of it, and I want to talk about some of the other trades that we've already started. Now, this wasn't a trading deadline day. Monday wasn't like a day where, trades had to be made necessarily. Trades can be made between now and the NBA trading deadline, but for whatever reason, the past couple, 24, 48 hours has been almost treated like an NBA trading deadline. And then some. It's been even better with some of the big names being traded. I just talked about Harden potentially being traded to Brooklyn. And now I want to transition now to what the Milwaukee Bucks did and my theory on why they did it. So if you didn't hear, the Milwaukee Bucks made two trades yesterday. One of them for New Orleans Pelicans combo guard Jrue Holiday, in which they gave up a lot. And by a lot, I mean pretty much an identical replication of the Anthony Davis trade package, right? So New Orleans, according to Adrian Wojnarowski, Shams, pretty much everybody, said that they're sending, in return for Jrue Holiday, right? So the Pelicans are getting Jrue Holiday, the Bucks are getting Jrue Holiday, and the Bucks are sending back Eric Bledsoe, George Hill, and what was initially described as significant draft compensation. So my initial thought when the first tweet came out of, wow, the Milwaukee Bucks got a steal. They only had to give up, Eric Bledsoe and George Hill. George Hill, who's a little bit on the older side, veteran, nice guy, nice player, not what he used to be, not incredibly effective, not even a starter in the league anymore. And Jrue Holiday is just a better version in a way, bigger upgrade of Drew Bledsoe. So at first I thought this was a steal. And by significant draft compensation, I thought it was going to be their first round pick this year. And I would have called it a win-win on both sides. The Bucks get Jrue Holiday without giving up a huge amount, not giving up a ton. But then the compensation came out. The Milwaukee Bucks are giving up 3 first-round picks and 2 pick swaps, plus Eric Bledsoe, plus George Hill, to just get Jrue Holiday. And here's my thoughts on it for a couple of reasons. One, I like Jrue Holiday. I think he's a fantastic player. I think he's a top 10 two-way player in the league. I don't think he's as great offensively as he is defensively, but from a perimeter defense standpoint, Jrue Holiday plays hard on both ends. He's a leader. He's a great veteran to have on a team like Milwaukee. Do I agree with Milwaukee giving up Bledsoe to get Jrue Holiday? 100%. Complete upgrade without a shadow of a doubt. That is a great upgrade to the roster for the team from Milwaukee. I think his game fits better with Giannis than the Bledsoe did. I think he's a better shooter than Bledsoe. I think he's a better defender than Bledsoe. He's taller than Bledsoe. I don't know if he's not. Maybe he's not as flashy, but I think he's just as athletic, and I think he's more of a team player than Bledsoe is. And I think, again, just as a whole, his game fits what Middleton and Giannis and Budenholzer have been doing the past couple of seasons. He can work on the ball. He can work off the ball. He's clutch. He's hit some big-time moments. He's a 3-level scorer. He can give you the mid-range. He can give you the 3-point shot. He can give you, layups. He can also, take the 3-point shot off the dribble. He can work off the dribble, create his own shot, as well as create for others. Overall, the acquisition for Milwaukee of getting Jrue Holiday makes perfect sense, and it makes a lot. What I don't understand is the compensation. Because I don't know how many players in this league are worth an all-star, borderline all-star, I would say, Drew Bledsoe, who made an all-NBA defensive team, by the way. George Hill, a veteran that can help you compete for a championship. 3 first-round picks and 2 pick swaps. There's only a handful of players that's worth, in my opinion. One of them being LeBron James. We saw that exact trade package happen for Anthony Davis. We saw, maybe James Harden's worth a trade package like that. Maybe Steph Curry's worth a trade package like that. Kevin Durant. I don't even know if Jimmy Butler is worth that trade package, and he just carried the Miami Heat to the finals. So how is Jrue Holiday worth it? Because, again, there's a lot of great players in this league, but I wouldn't consider Jrue Holiday a top 15 player. Would you consider Jrue Holiday a top 20 player? I probably wouldn't. Would you consider Jrue Holiday a top 25 player? And I think at best, Jrue Holiday fits a top 25 player discussion, but I don't even think he makes it to that point. Top 30, I'd say yes. But again, top 25 is pushing it, right? Because then you get into the conversation of some of these other guys have to get outside of the top 15. You're like, well, where does Kyrie come and play? Where does Devin Booker come into play? Where does Trae Young, Luka Doncic, all of these guys, right? Bam Adebayo. You get into the conversation of those guys, and I think Jrue Holiday is a top 25 player at best. I don't think he's worth 3 first-round picks and 2 pick swaps plus Bledsoe plus George Hill. I think that's the type of trade package you put together to get, a difference maker, a game changer. I'm not saying that Jrue Holiday is not necessarily a game changer. I think he's a really great plug-and-play guy. I think he's a winning guy. I think he's a two-way player. And I think he's more than a role player, but less than an all-star. I think he's a really, really, really good player. I think he's a borderline all-star is what I think. I think I put him at the same tier, maybe slightly below Chris Middleton. But what he does in the two-way, you're really getting him for the defense, the glove-type stuff, the plug-and-play sort of thing. He's an immediate upgrade of that position. Again, everything about Jrue Holiday fits this Milwaukee team, and it's a great signing. But even if the Milwaukee Bucks had traded those 2 guys, plus the 3 first-round picks and 2 pick swaps for Chris Paul, who I'm really, really high on, I thought Milwaukee should have gone after Chris Paul, I still would have told you it's an overpay, and I think Chris Paul is better than Jrue Holiday. So what does that tell you about this trade? The pressure on the Milwaukee Bucks that they felt at least to make a move to try to keep Giannis Antetokounmpo long-term was immense and was almost impossible to overcome for them so much to overpay for a guy like Jrue Holiday and to give up one of their better young players, Dante DiVincenzo, to get Bogdanovich, right, who they're eventually going to have to pay at some point. Again, Jrue Holiday's a veteran, 29 years old, maybe even 30 at this point. He's not a young guy, right? He's not a kid. He's not still on his rookie contract or anything. He's an established veteran presence in this league that has contributed to winning teams, right? This wasn't, a young, trying to get younger or trying to get a future star or anything like that. So back to the reasons why, the Milwaukee Bucks made this trade. Giannis Antetokounmpo, in my opinion, here's my theory, had a meeting with the Milwaukee Bucks. And he said, I don't know when this meeting was. I don't have any sources. I don't have any concrete evidence of this, but this is how I envision the Milwaukee Bucks situation playing out. Again, I think, Giannis had his standard exit meeting, not like exiting the team, but exit, like the season's over and you have that exit meeting with the coach and the front office and everything. And I think Giannis Antetokounmpo in that meeting was probably formally offered his super mega contract extension. I don't even know the exact numbers on it, making the highest paid player in the league. The Supermax that some of the guys who have stayed home to the team that have drafted him have signed. Guys like Russell Westbrook signed that. Guys, who else has signed a Supermax? I think Chris Paul has signed a Supermax. Blake Griffin, I think, also signed a Supermax. John Wall, I think, is another guy. Bradley Beal has been offered it. Like, things like that. So I think he was offered formally that contract extension. And I don't think Giannis necessarily said no to the contract extension, but he didn't say yes either. He didn't sign it in that meeting. He didn't sign it in the room. And he, was like, my options are still open. He left, and then also there was that interview that I want to say Giannis's friend had with the Australian. I don't know his name or anything. I just saw the clip on Twitter where pretty much he said your relationship with Giannis, and he pretty much said after they got eliminated, he asked him, are you signing with the Miami Heat, and are you going to Miami, right? And Giannis just smiled apparently on the phone. Giannis jokingly said on Twitter, "Why you always got to start stuff, man?" But also didn't deny the rumor and things like that. So rumors started speculating. I think a combination of that and Giannis not officially agreeing to that contract extension put the Bucks in a position where they thought to themselves, we need to make a move. Now, why did they think they need to make a move so soon and so urgent? I really do believe that in the next week or so, we were going to get a report that Giannis Antetokounmpo wanted out of Milwaukee. I think Giannis Antetokounmpo was going to demand a trade in the next month or so before the season to Toronto, Golden State, or Miami. I think those were his 3 trade destinations, and I think he was going to request a trade to go to one of those teams. And I think that either he told Milwaukee that if they didn't make a move soon, he was going to demand a trade and he wasn't going to sign the extension. So what did Milwaukee do? They aggressively overpaid for a guy in Jrue Holiday who I like, but we're not even sure if he's a top 20/25 player in the NBA right now, let alone top 15 or 10. I think the Bucks gave the Pelicans a trade package for a top 5 player in the league. That's what you gave up for Anthony. That's what the Lakers gave up for Anthony Davis, top 5 player in the league. You give up for a guy who's a top 5 player in the league. Jrue Holiday's not top 5. He's not top 10. I don't think he's top 15. I don't even think he's top 20. I don't even know if he's top 25 for 100% certainty. But again, I like the move. I like the fit. I think Jrue Holiday as a game styler, as a game manager, is a perfect fit for Giannis Antetokounmpo. He's played with a guy who likes to run the floor a lot, Zion Williamson. He's used to giving the big guy in the post and letting him work, right? He's used to giving up the ball and letting somebody else work. Brandon Ingram or Anthony Davis when he played with him, or DeMarcus Cousins when he played with him, or Brandon Ingram, again, Lonzo, and Zion, of course. So he's experienced with playing off ball. He doesn't need the ball in his hands versus a guy like Harden or Westbrook. They need the ball in their hands to be effective. I just think you don't give up that much. My question to Milwaukee is, who are you outbidding? Who offered 2 first-round picks for Jrue Holiday, right? Because a trade package for Jrue Holiday for me would be a couple players and a pick, maybe. I mean, I know one of the teams interested in Jrue Holiday was potentially the Miami Heat. I would have given up Kendrick Nunn, Kelly Olynyk, a pick in KZ Okpala probably, or I heard the Celtics were interested. I'd give up probably Hayward and a pick, right? You don't give up this huge amount for a guy like Jrue Holiday. So my question to Milwaukee would be, who are you outbidding? Did maybe Boston, did maybe Miami offer 2 first-round picks and you need to one-up that? You need to one-up that deal? Because again, Milwaukee, since they don't have a lot of those young players, they don't have a guy like Kendrick Nunn or Tyler Hero or Jaylen Brown to sort of dangle, or Michael Porter Jr. or these young assets that are already in the league. They don't have that type of guy that they can dangle around for a team that maybe want to trade with. They don't even have a guy like Kyle Kuzma. They have Dante DiVincenzo, right? Or had, I should say. So maybe they just wanted to overcompensate with picks. That's my guess. Again, in terms of both of the trades, Bogdan Bogdanovic is a shooter, straight up catch and shoot guy, can play some defense, not terribly short. He's also a good addition. I don't want to minimize that. The acquisition of Jrue Holiday and Bogdan Bogdanovic today make the Milwaukee Bucks the best team in the East. Right now, I think from a record standpoint, they're the best team in the East. I think they're above Brooklyn right now and Miami, who I had both of those teams above Milwaukee before these trades. Now, I think Miami's going to make another move. I think Miami's going to get Danilo Gallinari, who I think is the best stretch big in the entire league. That isn't, just the best pure stretch big. That isn't also a superstar, right? Of course, Karl Anthony Towns and Anthony Davis are the best 3-point shooting bigs, and Nikola Jokic is also considered a stretch big. But from a pure base of stretch bigness, and that's all you are as a role player / permanent, potential all-star, Danilo Gallinari to the Heat makes a lot of sense, and I think they're going to make that move. And of course, they could also trade for Victor Oladipo, Bradley Beal, Buddy Hield, I've heard is another name Miami's interested in. So I expect the Miami Heat to make another move, not to mention they're only going to be better next year due to the development of Tyler Hero and Bam Adebayo and Duncan Robinson. So they don't even necessarily need to make a move. The development of their young players might already be a move. So when you see that, Miami you already lost to is only getting better, and Brooklyn obviously going after Harden and they get Kevin Durant back, Milwaukee felt obligated to make a move, plus all the pressure from Giannis, and maybe the direct quote from Giannis to them of, if you do not get me players, I am leaving. So there's a lot of more moves that are going to happen in the East, but as of right now, if no other move was made with Eastern Conference teams, I would have Milwaukee as my favorite to win the East in terms of regular season record. I still need to see Giannis in the playoffs, see if he can beat teams like the Heat, who obviously just beat them, in the Nets as well. All right, that's everything Milwaukee. I want to transition now to the other major trade that we had going on the NBA in the last 24 to 48 hours. And it's crazy because when I saw this trade, when I got the news of this trade, I obviously wasn't recording that day, and I was like, oh my God, I cannot wait to lead this episode off, right, with the Chris Paul to the Phoenix Suns trade. It is now the third thing I'm talking about. That's how crazy, that's how awesome the NBA is. But let's get into everything Chris Paul to the Phoenix Suns, everything about that trade, and what does that mean for the Suns going forward. We'll get into all of that good stuff, as well as some new Russell Westbrook updates right after this short break. And do not forget, at the very end of the episode, I know usually on Tuesday I dominate this with the NFL, but I'm not going to talk about the NFL till the very end because of all the NBA news. So again, after this short break, I'll be giving you everything Chris Paul trade, what it means for the Suns going forward, and Chris Paul's career, as well as some Russell Westbrook rumors and where I could see him potentially landing. And then at the end of the episode, I'll give you everything NFL, some quick points, some quick major storylines. We'll get into all that good stuff right after this short break.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to Extreme Cage Fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back here at the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Again, I am your host, Alex Masford. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode and to be continuing to listen to the GSMC Sports Podcast. If you are a returning listener, we really do appreciate you. I just finished talking everything, continuing my conversation about the NBA offseason, talking about some trades. I obviously talked about Harden earlier. I talked about the Jrue Holiday trade to the Milwaukee Bucks. Again, I think it's a really aggressive overpay, and I think it's for a couple of reasons. One of them definitely being they felt some pressure, I think, just in general due to all the news and everybody speculating that Giannis was going to leave. But for them to completely and totally aggressively and egregiously overpay for a guy like Jrue Holiday, I have to think there was some sort of more direct pressure coming from Giannis, his agent, internally. Whatever it might be, the Bucks clearly felt the need to make a move and make a move quickly. Keep in mind, the NBA offseason is not coming to an end until December 1st is when training camp opens, right? And even after that, people still make trades in training camp, big trades before the deadline. They did not have to make a move day 1/day 2 of trades even becoming able to make. They could have taken their time, seeing the trades, waited post-draft, but they felt the need to make a move on the initial day of trades even being allowed, which is why I really do think that Giannis was either on the cusp of or had plans to or was seriously thinking about demanding a trade soon. Because otherwise, this timetable just doesn't make a lot of sense on why they wanted to make these moves now and as quickly as possible, considering all they're giving up. I don't think Jrue Holiday was going anywhere soon. Again, unless the Celtics or Heat or some of these other teams already had a deal in place and the Bucks were just trying to one-up it, the timing and the compensation just doesn't make a ton of sense for me on why they would make this move now. and for the price. Again, I think long term and short term, I think it's great. I'm not disagreeing with the move itself as in acquiring Jrue Holiday. It's just the price, and I feel like you didn't need to give up that much, again, unless you were trying to one-up an offer. Again, that's just my personal opinion. All right, I want to transition now to the other major trade. Again, like I said in my last segment, when Chris Paul was traded to the Phoenix Suns, my initial thought was I cannot wait to talk about it on the show. I cannot wait for that to be the first thing I talk about on the show in this episode. And it's now the third thing I'm talking about, which is absolutely crazy. That just shows you that the NBA is just a gift that keeps on giving. So let's break down everything Chris Paul to the Phoenix Suns. So CP3 was obviously traded to Phoenix. The compensation was Kelly Oubre, who's a nice young player for Phoenix. In terms of young players, I think he's a nicer young player than Dante DiVincenzo, who went to the Kings for Bogdanovic. I'd probably put him on the same level as Kyle Kuzma. Again, I'm not very high on Kyle Kuzma, but Kelly Oubre's a pretty good player. Ricky Rubio, who's just a standard starting point guard in the league, slightly overpaid. And I think there was also some draft compensation from Phoenix going to the Thunder in exchange for, obviously, Chris Paul. Now, there's a couple of moves here. A couple of things to break down here. This, unlike maybe some of the other trades, is a win-win, right? So I consider if Harden does eventually get traded to Houston, I don't think there's a real way that Houston wins the trade unless they absolutely nail all of their draft picks. But then again, those Brooklyn draft picks are not going to be very high over the next 5 to 7 years, assuming that's the trade package, those 3 firsts and the 2 and all that. For Milwaukee, again, overpay. I don't necessarily see this as a win-win. It's only a win-win if Milwaukee wins a championship. If it's not, then I don't know. And of course, the Pelicans won because they got a ton of draft compensation for a guy who was probably the third best player on their team or third most important player behind Ingram and Zion. And of course, they have other guards they can fill in. They have Josh Hart, Lonzo Ball, oh my God, what's his name? Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's cousin, I'm blanking on his name, I apologize, but he also plays for the New Orleans Pelicans. They have a ton of guards that they can go miss and match out of. They didn't necessarily need Jrue Holiday. He was a good player, not a great player, and I'm pretty sure, in all honesty, they really gave them an offer they couldn't refuse. But this trade here is a win-win. I don't think the Suns gave up too much for Chris Paul. If anything, they gave up a little less. Chris Paul, here's the thing, because Chris Paul, a little over a year ago, when he was traded from Houston to Oklahoma City, his value was at an all-time low. I think a lot of people consider Chris Paul to quite literally be the worst contract in the NBA. And if you remember, the Houston Rockets the Oklahoma City Thunder gave up picks, I think. No, Houston gave up picks and Chris Paul to get Russell Westbrook, and then Russell Westbrook ended up being worse than Chris Paul this year. What Chris Paul did this year for Oklahoma City is completely revive his career and reputation. Chris Paul looked like he should retire in the next 3 years. When he was playing for Houston, he looked old, he looked hurt, he looked washed. And when he came to Houston, when he came to Oklahoma City, he was expected to be the the best player on one of the worst teams in the NBA, and he was pretty much in hell in terms of his own, personal circumstance and things like that. But what ended up happening instead was Chris Paul ended up going to a really, really nice team in Oklahoma City with a lot of young, nice players, became the leader, became the captain, and carried them to a top 5 seed in the Western Conference. So his value went from an all-time low to an all-time high like that because of a year, and sort of Russell Westbrook did the reverse, right? Coming out of Oklahoma City as a potential MVP candidate, Russell Westbrook's value was at an all-time high, and now it's almost at an all-time low. So they've kind of sort of reversed, and I want to talk about both of them in this segment. But for Chris Paul's value to be kind of revived like that is incredible. If Phoenix had given up 2 first-round picks for Chris Paul, I would have also argued that was also fair value. That's how good Chris Paul is, and I think why Chris Paul is so valuable is not because of just his play. Of course, so Chris Paul is probably one of the best pure point guards in the NBA, still one of the best passers in the NBA, can still defend at a decent level. But what Chris Paul brings to this Phoenix Suns team and what he brought to that Oklahoma City Thunder team was his basketball IQ. When Chris Paul is the point guard and at the forefront of an offensive system, that system wins, right? He did it in Charlotte. He didn't necessarily win games, but it was a winning system. And LA, of course, he won multiple playoff series, never made it to the big game, but he won multiple playoff series. It was in Houston where James Harden became the main offensive focus and the main offensive general, where things sort of went sideways for Chris Paul. He comes back to Oklahoma City, gets full control of the offense. He's the one setting up the system, not only scoring himself, but also putting his teammates in positions to win. Chris Paul was allowed to elevate his teammates in Oklahoma City and in Charlotte and with the Clippers. He was not allowed to elevate his teammates in Houston because that was James Harden's job. So now you take him from Oklahoma City to, I think, just a better version of Oklahoma City, Phoenix. And I think you have something really, really special viewing in Phoenix because, again, I really liked Oklahoma City's roster. They got a lot of nice players on there. Danilo Gallinari, who will eventually move on probably to the Miami Heat, is my guess. Obviously, Schroeder went to the Lakers, and now it's kind of just SGA, who will just be that, franchise centerpiece for years and years to come. But what's really, really big for Chris Paul is while Devin Booker would have been the best player on Oklahoma City, there's a lot of other nice players on there too. DeAndre Ayton's a really nice young player as well. Devin Booker, like I just mentioned, has Kobe Bryant-esque type scoring package, right? He got 70 in a game one time, and again, he's still really young. I think he's under 25 still, which is crazy to think about. Now give those two, Ayton and Booker, who are a really, really nice young duo in this league. Again, that duo alone with head coach Monty Williams went 8-0 in the bubble and almost made the playoffs, right? They were one of those teams that was barely invited to the bubble, that nobody thought out of. They were the only team in the bubble to go completely undefeated in that 8-0 regular season stretch. They didn't make the playoffs because, again, they just had such a poor regular season. I think the flip switched. They realized, I think Phoenix has a really, really good head coach. I think Monty Williams is a very good head coach from a player development standpoint and from a system standpoint. I like him a lot. And I think the Phoenix Suns realize that if teams like the Pelicans and the Grizzlies and the Trailblazers are all going to fight for this 8th seed, and it looks like the play-in tournament, which is what we had, again, those four sort of, that one game that decided, who's going to be that 8th seed, that's coming back. The 7th and 8th seed, that play-in tournament is coming back for the NBA playoffs going forward. So now the goal isn't even just to be necessarily the 8th seed in the playoffs, it's just to get into the play-in tournament. And Chris Paul, in my opinion, is going to do a lot more of that for you. Chris Paul, when he will be dominating this offensive system, he will be putting guys in position to succeed. What Chris Paul is not only going to do for Devin Booker, but more importantly for DeAndre Ayton, is why the Suns have the chance to be a top 5 seed in the Western Conference this year. Again, I really like their head coach, Monty Williams. I think Jones, their general manager, is really good. Former NBA player, played with the Miami Heat, in fact, has a lot of connections around the league, has a lot of connections to agents around the league. He's a really, really good player, pro player, sort of player movement general manager. Again, Monty Williams, I think, is a very player-friendly head coach. I think that Phoenix Suns team got really, really close at the end of the bubble. Got a lot of nice players on there. DeAndre Ayton was really coming along at the end of last year, and we know Devin Booker was absolutely dominating the bubble from an offensive standpoint. Give them Chris Paul. Again, I know Chris Paul everyone's going to talk about the Chris Paul-Devin Booker pairing. Devin Booker doesn't necessarily need another guy to push him or get better. Devin Booker's already elite, one of the best scorers in the NBA. Devin Booker's going to be fine with or without Chris Paul. He was going to be fine. What this is going to do for DeAndre Ayton and the other young players on the Phoenix Suns and the other role players that they have is that's where you're really going to see this team being elevated. Chris Paul single-handedly elevates the other, 10 to 15 guys on the team not named Devin Booker. Will he improve Devin Booker? Sure. But you're not going to see a leap and bound jump from Devin Booker because of Chris Paul. You're just not going to see that. But DeAndre Ayton might take a leap, but some of these other role players on this team might take a leap, Bridges included, right? What Chris Paul is going to do to put these other guys, Ayton, Bridges, in a position to succeed, you will see the best version of DeAndre Ayton, the best version of Bridges because of Chris Paul's play and his passing and his attention to detail and his ability to sort of cut up and dissect an opposing team's defense. And that's what Chris Paul is going to provide value for with this team, not to mention his leadership, his mentality, his aggressiveness, his clutch shot making, really was the best clutch shooter in the NBA last year, pretty much the best fourth quarter performer, right? If you can take that Oklahoma City roster, which was good, not great, with a Billy Donovan with a coach who's pretty good, all the way to the 5th seed in the West and push Houston to a 7th game, with this roster, man, with he's not even being asked to be the best player on Phoenix, right? He's not asked to carry Oklahoma, carry them like he did in Oklahoma City. He's just asking, make guys better, do your thing, run the offense, hit those clutch shots, and let Devin Booker really be the main part of this offense. And I know I just said that when Chris Paul isn't the main part of the offense, he's not effective. That's not what I'm saying. This is what I really mean to say, right? When he's not the focal point of the offense, because of course James Harden was the focal point of the offense. When he's allowed to be the floor general, that's where Chris Paul is most effective. He's not good in ISO ball. And that's all James Harden was. I think with more ball movement, again, putting guys in position to succeed. And yes, you're going to hear all about the backcourt of Devin Booker and Chris Paul. But Devin Booker was going to score and get buckets and win games. Or not make the playoffs, but to win on his own without Chris Paul. This just brings the entire team to another level. This is more about the team than it is about Devin Booker, more about DeAndre Ayton, in my opinion, than even Devin Booker. So again, really, really great trade for the Phoenix Suns. I don't think they overpaid it. If anything, they underpaid, but I think it's a win-win. Chris Paul did not fit the timeline of Oklahoma City, if you want to talk about their side of this briefly. By the time Oklahoma City was really going to get good with all their draft picks, Chris Paul was going to be long retired by then. So at this point, he wasn't going to fit that timeline. And of course, Sam Presti sort of lucked out that Chris Paul sort of really revived his career and really revived his reputation around the league, really revived his value. They get some more draft picks and draft capital and a really nice young player in Kelly Oubre. So overall, I think it was a really interesting move by Phoenix. It was a move that I absolutely love. I would have also loved to see Chris Paul and the Knicks bring in Carmelo, but this is better for the league. I really think Phoenix is going to be a really good team next year. I think Monty Williams is going to get some Coach of the Year votes, and I think Chris Paul is more valuable than I think people are giving him credit for. And I think, that trade package that Milwaukee gave up for Jrue Holiday, that's a more appropriate trade package for Chris Paul than Jrue Holiday. I understand Chris Paul's older, and I understand Chris Paul looked pretty washed about a year and a half ago. I think that trade package that Milwaukee gave up for Jrue Holiday would be more fair for a guy like Chris Paul. I think he's that valuable to a team and another organization. Chris Paul's basketball IQ is absolutely off the chart. I just ranted and raved about Steve Nash. Having Chris Paul on the floor is almost like having another coach on the floor, if not more, considering he's live actually in the game and dissecting that defense. I think it's going to be an absolute huge addition for the Phoenix Suns, and I think the Suns are a dark horse team next year for a team like Denver. So remember how Denver last year sort of not came out of nowhere. They were already like the top 3 seed in the East, but really made that next leap into getting to a conference finals. This team reminds me a lot of Denver. A lot of guys are not going to, you're playing Phoenix tonight. Doesn't seem, seems like the easiest game in the world, right? They're going to be a tough out, and they're going to win a lot of games in the clutch. I think if you just get to the fourth quarter, if you're the Phoenix Suns, and if Devin Booker can get you to the fourth quarter, and then, Chris Paul can almost handle the rest. Not necessarily Devin Booker's, and I'm not saying Devin Booker's not clutch. He's extremely clutch. But if you can just get to the fourth quarter and Chris Paul's legs are still refreshed and look energized and he doesn't look, maybe what he is now, which is 36 years old, 35 years old, you're going to win a lot of games, a lot of close games. And I'm really excited to watch this Phoenix Suns team coming into next NBA season. Quickly, before I go talk about the NFL in the last segment, we have some update on the Russell Westbrook situation. I was hoping that maybe as I was recording this, we got even some more breaking news of a trade being finalized. But pretty much Shams just said there's been some discussions between the Washington Wizards and the Houston Rockets on potential John Wall for Russell Westbrook swap. Now, does this make sense for Houston? Absolutely. If they're 100% going to trade James Harden, they should look to move off Russell Westbrook. John Wall isn't going to do anything crazy for Houston. It's more of a salary cap dump, get that contract off the books, and go into a full-fledged rebuild, and who knows what will happen with John Wall. So from Houston, makes absolute sense. There's no need to hang on to Russell Westbrook if James Harden's not going to be there, right? So it makes sense. But for Washington, that makes absolutely no sense. I understand Washington's small market, but they have come out and said that Bradley Beal is not going anywhere, and I'm pretty sure it's relatively known how close Bradley Beal and John Wall are, not just his teammates, but his close friends. So it wouldn't make a ton of sense if you want to keep Beal long-term to trade John Wall for Russell Westbrook. But everyone would obviously say on Twitter and everything, well, isn't Russell Westbrook clearly better than John Wall? Unfortunately, the answer is no. Russell Westbrook has been declining each year since his MVP. He's a terrible shooter, and he's getting less and less athletic over the years, and he's just becoming more and more of an ineffective player and a more and more harder player to deal with and play with. And I understand John Wall's been pretty much out of basketball the last 2 years. I'd still rather have John Wall at this point than Russell Westbrook, unless Russell Westbrook's going to pull a Chris Paul and sort of revive his career in Washington. Either way, it doesn't make a ton of sense. Unless you were going to trade a guy like Bradley Beal to the Miami Heat for Hero and Robinson, and then you wanted to also compete while at the same time rebuild, maybe surround shooters with Russell Westbrook. But if you're hanging on to Bradley Beal, Russell Westbrook and him do not make a ton of sense together, specifically since Beal is so close with Wall both on and off the court. All right, that's going to do it for this segment. On the other side of this final short break, I want to give you everything major NFL storyline. What did I think of the outstanding game between the Arizona Cardinals and the Buffalo Bills? Who was going to win the AFC East between the Bills and Dolphins? And much, much more. We'll get into everything NFL Week 9 recap right after this short break.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
All right, and we are back here at the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Again, I am your host, Alex Masper. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode and to be continuing to listen to the GSMC Sports Podcast. Again, if you are a returning listener, we really do appreciate you. I just finished talking everything Chris Paul trade and Russell Westbrook sweepstakes, and really this entire episode's been dominated by the NBA trade news and everything like that, which is really not, traditional for me considering it is Tuesday, the NFL week just ended, and that's what I want to transition to, the NFL. Now, I'm not going to say I'm going to get to each and every NFL game like I usually do. We're running out of time a little bit here, but I promise you I will talk a lot more NFL in my next episode on Thursday. But what I will talk about here is some of the major games and major storylines I have just briefly over the next couple minutes or so. And then in my next episode, I will 100% get to pretty much each and every NFL game from this past week and break down the divisions as the division races are getting really interesting. But just quickly, some of the things that I really want to get to and I really want to talk about some of my opinions. First of all, we have an MVP of the National Football League, right? We know who it is, right? It's not Patrick Mahomes. No, it's not. It's not Russell Wilson anymore. It's not. We have the 2020 NFL MVP already known, already playing. His name is Kyler Murray. Now, again, this is not a hot take. Kyler Murray was one of the clear favorites to win MVP this year, and we kind of knew that, quarterbacks from year one to year two make this sort of jump. Lamar Jackson made the jump. Patrick Mahomes made the jump, and I think some guys like Tua Tagovailoa are going to make the jump next year. But this year was Kyler Murray's second year in the league, and he has officially made the jump. And we kind of knew this. They added DeAndre Hopkins year two in the Cliff Kingsbury system, added a guy like Isaiah Simmons, a couple nice players, and the Cardinals looked like a real team. I don't think anybody could have foreseen how good Kyler Murray was going to be this year. I knew Kyler Murray was going to be good. He wasn't my MVP pick, but I thought he'd be a finalist. I think he's my pick now. I think Kyler Murray is going to win the MVP. And I don't think we've ever seen, this is interesting, an athlete like Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray is 5'9", playing in a sport that is dominated by big people, both tall and wide. And he is playing the most important position in sports, quarterback. He was drafted by, top 10 picks in multiple sports, both baseball and, of course, football with the Cardinals. We've never seen an athlete like him. Kyler Murray quite literally might be the most athletic player on the planet in all of the four major sports. And he's doing it all while pretty much being 5'9.5". Kyler Murray has the quickest feet I have ever seen in my life. And I think the quickest feet since Barry Sanders did in the Lions. The way he moves, the way he operates, the way he reverses field, the way he cuts, the way he jumps, the way he finds gaps to run through is absolutely incredible. And it sounds like I'm talking about a running back. I'm not. I'm talking about a quarterback who's going to throw for over 4,000 yards. Kyler Murray is going to be this year the first quarterback, he hasn't done it yet, but he's going to be the first quarterback ever to run for over 1,000 yards and throw for over 4,000 yards. We freaked out about Lamar Jackson last year, right? Everyone was like, oh my God, Lamar Jackson last year was absolutely unbelievable. Kyler Murray is going to have a way better season than he is now. So right now, right, we look everything about Lamar Jackson. We love Lamar Jackson. I love Lamar Jackson, right? Lamar Jackson is not going to, and I repeat, he's not going to run for, over 1,000 yards and throw for over 4,000 yards. He didn't do it last year, and Kyler Murray is going to be the first player to do that. Not to mention, Kyler Murray, I'm pretty sure, already has 10 touchdowns this year rushing. If he doesn't have 10, he's pretty close and he'll get there. So he's going to run for double-digit touchdowns, throw for how many touchdowns? He already has this season he already has 17 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. So he's on pace to throw 32 touchdowns this year? Pretty good stuff if you ask me, with a 2-to-1 touchdown to completion percentage, right? And he's, of course, already, ran for, I don't even know how many touchdowns this season. Here's the thing with Kyler Murray, folks. He's incredible. And we know that he is an incredible dual-threat quarterback. But again, I don't think anybody foreseen him throwing for 4,000 yards, rushing for 1,000 yards, throwing for probably between 32 and 40 touchdowns, and rushing for double-digit touchdowns as well. Everything about Lamar Jackson we love, Kyler Murray is better at. I don't know if Lamar Jackson is, or maybe Kyler Murray is as good as a runner, but I could argue he's better. I think he's more effective as a runner. I think Lamar Jackson is more flashy as a runner, but Kyler Murray gets touchdowns. Kyler Murray gets first downs. And Kyler Murray doesn't need to run the ball to be effective. If Lamar Jackson doesn't run the ball all day, he's not effective. Kyler Murray doesn't need to do that. Again, he threw that Hail Mary over Hopkins. This isn't even about necessarily the Bills game. What he did against Miami despite a loss, what he did in that Seattle game with a win, what I think he'll do again this Thursday against Seattle, and of course what he did Sunday against Buffalo. Just every single week, he gets better and better and proves the case that he's already a top 10 QB in the league. So today, Kyler Murray is already a top 10 quarterback in the league, and he's the MVP favorite, and I think he's the best offensive player in football. I think Christian McCaffrey's incredible. I think Dalvin Cook's incredible. Russell Wilson was like this for me forever, including this year. But right now, Kyler Murray is the best offensive player in football, and I think he should win both Offensive Player of the Year and MVP. MVP stands for Most Valuable Player. There is no team in this league more valuable. There's no player in this league right now more valuable than Kyler Murray besides Russell Wilson. If you take Patrick Mahomes away from the Chiefs and put in Matt Moore, you win a couple games. You don't make the playoffs, but you win a couple games. You take Russell Wilson and Kyler Murray away from their teams are both bottom 5 in the league. If you take more Cardinals than Wilson, I think people, criticize Russell Wilson's surrounding cast a little bit too much. I think it's better than people think. DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett's a really good, nice backfield, a really good receiving core. Not to mention a Chris Carson who's a very good running back and a defense that's improving, not great, but improving. If you take Kyler Murray away from this Arizona Cardinal team, how many wins do they get? Because I could argue pretty much every single game they've won this year has been because of him, and every single game they lost this year was not because of him. I think the most valuable player in the league right now is Kyler Murray. The most valuable player to the team right now is Kyler Murray. And if he wins this division, I think it just solidifies it, period. Because right now, Kyler Murray is quite literally having one of the best seasons we've ever seen from a quarterback, period. We've ever seen from an athlete, period. And in my opinion, he's running away with the MVP at this point. Winning the division would just be a cherry on top. Speaking of some divisional races, I want to talk about the other team that played in that game, which was the Buffalo Bills. So, of course, they're now 7-3, still atop of the division. But it's not as clear-cut who's going to win that division anymore. I think after the first month of the season, everybody was pretty clear. Oh, the Buffalo Bills, they look pretty good this year. They're going to win the playoffs. They're going to win the division. And then came the Miami Dolphins. Miami Dolphins started 1-3 this year with losses to both the Bills, Seahawks, and Patriots. Since then, they have won 5 straight games while making a quarterback change. That quarterback change was obviously from Ryan Fitzpatrick to Tua Tagovailoa. Everybody criticized it. How can you take out Ryan Fitzmagic? He's playing so well. He's incredible, yada, yada, this. Well, Tua Tagovailoa has improved the team in pretty much every single way from an offensive standpoint and is winning games by bigger margins. I think that was the right call, don't you? Tua Tagovailoa, of course, just beat the Los Angeles Chargers 29-21. Wasn't asked to do a whole lot, but when he was asked, he did. 15 of 25, 169 yards, 2 passing touchdowns. No picks, no fumbles, no turnovers. This Miami Dolphins team is just finding ways to win, folks. And I'm going to tell you right now, I think they're winning the division at the end of this year. Week 17, there's a matchup between Buffalo and Miami in Buffalo. Obviously, Buffalo holds the tiebreaker right now. But I really do believe at the end of the day, the Miami Dolphins are going to be winning this division. Here's the thing with the Dolphins. They've had a great defense all year. They create turnovers. They've had turnovers in 15 straight games. They're the best scoring defense in the league. We knew this defense was legit no matter who the quarterback was. Here's the difference between Tua Tagovailoa and Ryan Fitzpatrick right now. Ryan Fitzpatrick's a gunslinger. He's going to throw the ball, throw interceptions plenty of times. In the game against Buffalo, he had multiple interceptions. In the game against, I think, New England, he had multiple interceptions. And I think the game against Seattle, he had at least 1 interception. All of those games were lost. 2 of those games were lost by 1 score. 1 of those games was lost by 11 points. If you put Tua Tagovailoa in right now for the Miami Dolphins at the beginning of the season, you can make the legitimate argument that they were not going to lose some of those games. Specifically the game against Buffalo, in which the Dolphins completely, recaptured the lead against Buffalo and then Ryan Fitzpatrick threw a lazy pick. That doesn't happen with Tua Tagovailoa again. 5 touchdowns, no interceptions in his career so far, 3-0 as a starter. His next 3 weeks, folks, Broncos, Jets, Bengals. There is a real chance, folks, that the Miami Dolphins are sitting 9-3 heading into a matchup with the Kansas City Chiefs in Miami. I would bet that game gets flexed to Sunday night because I think this Miami Dolphin team is better than people give it credit for. It's a top 10 team in the league. Might even be a top 5 because this defense is legit. They forced another turnover. They have an easy schedule heading down to the rest of the season. Buffalo's got a pretty tough one. They got to go to Pittsburgh. They got to face Miami again. They got to face New England again. I think there's a real chance that Miami steals this division from Buffalo, and this rebuild that Brian Flores is having is quicker than people believe it to be. Again, this offense, I think there was a great analogy. I think I saw it in a clip on Twitter. Somebody said that this Miami offense was hot and cold with Ryan Fitzpatrick. With Tua, they took out the cold. And that is so accurate and that is so correct. and I don't think there's really another way to put it. Tua's accuracy is a cheat code. The way he manipulates the defense with his eyes and his feet and still always finds, a perfect ball to throw and a perfect ball placement and perfect anticipation. This offense is scary, and it doesn't even have great weapons yet. Imagine what Tua Tagovailoa is going to do next year with some great weapons. I think next year is the real year for the Miami Dolphins. Wouldn't surprise me if they steal the division from Buffalo this year, though. All right, quickly, the final thing I want to talk about is the NFC East race. Again, I'm really interested in some of these divisional races, and I promise I will talk more NFL next week. I'll get to the Steelers, I'll get to the Browns, I'll get to the Packers, I'll get to the Bucks, I'll get to the Saints, I'll get to as much as I can in my next episode. I promise you that, including the Baltimore Ravens game, which I'm not going to be able to get to today, but I will get to on Thursday. But the final thing I want to say is I think the New York Giants are going to win the NFC East. I just went on a huge rant and a huge rave about how good Brian Flores and how good this Miami Dolphin teams look. If you remember how the Dolphins looked last year, right? Brian Flores, this was the worst team in football, 0-8. And then they finished the season better than the Tom Brady and Bill Belichick-led New England Patriots. We knew that something was building in Miami, a winning culture. Brian Flores seemed legit. Every single week, Joe Judge leads this New York Giants team to a better and better game, and they're starting to win more and more. And I don't know if they're tied for the division just yet. I think they both have 3 wins. I think they are tied for the division. But everyone was talking about Daniel Jones. The man's underrated at this point. Daniel Jones, 244 yards, 21 of 28, no picks, no touchdowns either, but no picks, 64 yards on the ground with a rushing touchdown. Daniel Jones is a dual-threat quarterback, and I know a lot of people like to slander him because of the interceptions, and I have been one of them. I do not like the way that Daniel Jones turns the ball over, but what I said Daniel Jones had to do, keep his job. Again, I thought Daniel Jones was okay, and I think Joe Judge is a legit head coach. Joe Judge reminds me a lot of Brian Flores last year and Brian Flores now. New York Giants could be really good next year. Like Miami, how Miami's good now, New York could do next year. But don't be surprised the Giants steal this division because it is that bad, and Daniel Jones is playing out of his mind right now. And here's the thing. All Daniel Jones has to do to keep his job is get to the 3rd overall pick, in my opinion. If the Giants pick at the 3rd overall level, Daniel Jones' job is safe. I think I would take Daniel Jones over Zach Wilson and Trey Lance right now. I think they're both good prospects. Could land some good teams and be really good. But I like what Daniel Jones is doing right now. But if Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence was available, I would move off Daniel Jones for one of those two. But now Daniel Jones is winning games, and Daniel Jones might win a division. And that means his job is safe. And I think Joe Judge is a real coach, and I think Daniel Jones might be a real quarterback. It's going to be an interesting situation to see play out in New York. Imagine if the Giants win this division without Saquon Barkley, with some picks next year, get some more weapons for Daniel Jones, get Saquon back, bolster that offensive line, bolster that defense. Again, Joe Judge looks like a legitimate head coach, in my opinion. Looks like a real head coach. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see the NFC East play out as well as the AFC East. That's going to do it, unfortunately, for today's episode of the GSMC Sports Podcast. I promise you I will talk more NFL on Thursday. Before I let you go, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, leave us a 5-star review, and follow us on all social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Again, thank you so much for listening to today's episode, and I will see you all in the next one.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.